The silence that descended after the news was a physical thing, a heavy blanket smothering the air in my sun-drenched living room. It clung to the antique Persian rug, seeped into the polished mahogany of the grand piano, and settled, cold and absolute, on the hollow ache where my heart used to be. My twin sister Clara was dead, drowned, lost at sea. The words, delivered with somber gravity by a detective whose face I barely registered, felt like shards of ice piercing my skin. There was an accident, Detective Miller had stammered, his eyes avoiding mine, fixed instead on the framed photograph of Clara and me, beaming idiotically into the camera, our identical smiles a testament to a shared existence that now felt like a cruel, elaborate joke. Her boat capsized during the storm last night. They've recovered a portion of the wreckage and personal effects. He'd trailed off, leaving a chasm of unspoken horrors in his wake. My husband, David, stood beside me, his arm a solid, comforting weight around my shoulders. Or at least it was supposed to be comforting. In that moment, even his touch felt alien, a phantom pressure against a body that had suddenly gone numb. I looked at him, his brow furrowed with a grief that mirrored my own, his eyes red-rimmed, his face etched with a pain so raw it was almost unbearable. He was my rock, my constant, the man I'd built my life with, the man Clara, my other half, had always adored from a respectful, loving distance. "Oh, Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry." I nodded, unable to form words. My throat felt like it was packed with cotton. Clara, my Clara, the vibrant, fiery spirit who was my shadow, my echo, my best friend. The one person on this earth who truly understood the unspoken language of our twin souls. How could she be gone? Just like that? A storm, a capsized boat, a few recovered belongings, a brutal, abrupt end to a life so full of promise. The detective cleared his throat, a sound that jolted me back to the present. "We'll need you to identify some of the items, Mrs. Davies, if you're up to it." David squeezed my shoulder. "We'll go." "Sarah, you don't have to." But I did. I had to. This was Clara. This was the last tangible piece of her I would ever see. I stood, my legs feeling like lead, and followed Detective Miller out of my living room, David's hand still a steadying presence on my back. The police station was a sterile, impersonal place, a stark contrast to the warmth and life that Clara had always exuded. They led us into a small, windowless room. On a metal table lay a collection of items, neatly arranged: a sodden, salt-stained scarf, a pair of waterlogged leather gloves. And then, my breath hitched. A silver locket, intricately engraved with our initials intertwined, mine and Clara's. My locket, the one I'd given her for her 21st birthday. My hands trembled as I reached for it. It was cold, heavy, and smelled faintly of the sea. I fumbled with the clasp, my fingers clumsy and numb. Inside, nestled against the faded velvet lining, were 2 miniature portraits. One of me, a younger, happier version, my eyes bright with an uncomplicated joy. The other of Clara, her smile just as radiant, just as familiar. A sob escaped my lips, raw and ragged. "It's hers," I choked out, my voice cracking. That's my locket." I gave it to her. Detective Miller nodded, his expression impassive. "We found it near where the debris washed ashore. It's a strong indicator, Mrs. Davies." David's arm tightened around me, pulling me close. I buried my face in his chest, the scent of his familiar cologne a small comfort in the suffocating darkness. But even as I clung to him, a tiny sliver of unease began to worm its way into my grief. It was too neat, too perfect. Clara, always the adventurer, the daredevil, out on her boat alone during a violent storm. It felt off. But then grief could twist anything, make the most sensible things seem suspect. The days that followed blurred into a haze of condolences, funeral arrangements, and endless, hollow conversations. The funeral itself was a somber affair, held on a gray, windswept beach that Clara had loved. The waves crashed against the shore, a mournful soundtrack to our collective sorrow. David was my rock, his presence a constant, unwavering support. He held my hand, kissed my forehead, and whispered words of comfort that I barely heard. He handled everything: the arrangements, the guests, the endless stream of casseroles and sympathy cards. He was, as always, the steady, dependable man I'd fallen in love with. And Clara's friends, her colleagues, her family, they all grieved with us, their tears a testament to the void she had left behind. I felt a profound loneliness, a sense of being adrift without my twin. The world felt unbalanced, a melody missing its most crucial note. I found myself constantly reaching for my phone, an automatic reflex to share some trivial observation with Clara, only to be met with the cold, hard reality of her absence. Weeks turned into months. The sharp edges of my grief began to soften, replaced by a dull, persistent ache. David was a constant source of solace. He'd cook for me, encourage me to go out, and gently coax me back into the rhythm of our lives. We spent more time together, our shared loss forging a new, deeper bond between us. Or so I thought. One rainy Tuesday evening, I was sorting through a box of Clara's belongings that had been returned to me. Old photographs, letters, trinkets. I came across a small, leather-bound journal. Clara's handwriting, so familiar, spilled across the pages. I hesitated, a pang of guilt for invading her privacy. But the need to connect with her, to feel her presence one last time, was overwhelming. I opened it, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The early entries were filled with her usual effervescence, tales of her travels, her dreams, her frustrations with work. But as I turned the pages, the tone began to shift. The entries became more secretive, more guarded. And then I saw it. A name I knew intimately. David. My blood ran cold. What was Clara writing about David? The entries were cryptic at first, filled with stolen glances, hushed conversations, a growing intimacy that made my stomach clench. Then the words became more explicit, more damning. "He looks at me differently now," one entry read. "There's a spark, I can feel it. Sarah doesn't see it. She's too complacent." Complacent? I was devoted. I loved David with every fiber of my being. My hand started to shake. I flipped through the pages frantically, my eyes scanning for more, searching for an explanation, a denial, anything that would contradict the horrifying narrative unfolding before me. And then I found it. A series of entries detailing clandestine meetings, whispered promises, a forbidden love affair. Clara and David, my twin sister, and my husband. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The journal fell from my numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on the floor. I stared at it, my mind reeling. It couldn't be true. Clara, my sister, the one person I thought I could trust implicitly, would never betray me like this. David, the man I'd shared my life with, my deepest secrets, my hopes and dreams. It was unthinkable. But the journal was there. Her words, undeniable. The dates, the details, the raw emotion that bled from the pages. The more I read, the more the pieces of a horrifying puzzle began to fall into place. The accident, the storm, the recovered locket. Was it all a lie? A carefully orchestrated deception? I stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady. I needed to confront David. I needed answers. But as I moved towards the living room, where he was supposedly working late, a chilling thought, born from the depths of my growing dread, began to take root. What if Clara wasn't dead at all? What if this entire charade, this elaborate performance of grief, was designed to achieve something far more sinister? The silence in the house, once a symbol of my sorrow, now felt heavy with unspoken secrets and the chilling echo of betrayal. I looked at the locket on the table, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. The locket that had once symbolized our unbreakable bond now felt like a cruel mockery, a glittering emblem of their deception. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, a terrifying question began to whisper, growing louder with each passing moment. If Clara was alive, then where was she? And why had she gone to such extreme lengths to make me believe she was dead? The answer, I suspected, would be far more devastating than the grief I had already endured. The words swam before my eyes, a chaotic kaleidoscope of betrayal and dawning horror. Clara and David. Clara and David. The journal lay open on my lap, its pages brittle with age and secrets, each sentence a fresh stab wound. It wasn't just a casual fling. The entries spoke of a deep, clandestine passion, a shared future plotted in hushed tones and stolen moments. My twin sister, my other half, the one person I'd always believed understood me better than anyone, had been systematically dismantling my life from the inside. The comfort I'd found in David's arms, his murmured condolences, his solicitous care, it all curdled into something vile and sickening. He hadn't just been mourning Clara, he'd been mourning the loss of his accomplice, the accident at sea, the recovered locket, the somber pronouncements from Detective Miller. It was all a meticulously crafted facade, a performance, and I, blinded by grief and an unwavering faith in the people I loved most, had been the unwitting audience. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the suffocating silence of my living room. The afternoon sun, which had once bathed this space in a cheerful glow, now felt harsh, intrusive, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny specters of my shattered reality. I traced the elegant script of Clara's handwriting, a familiar flourish that now sent shivers down my spine. She had always been the bolder one, the risk-taker, the one who lived life with a reckless abandon I envied. But this was beyond reckless. It was monstrous. The journal's narrative was relentless. It chronicled their clandestine meetings, the thrill of their deception, the carefully constructed alibis. Clara wrote of David's whispered promises, of how they would finally be free to be together once Sarah was no longer an obstacle. An obstacle. The word echoed in the hollow space where my heart used to be. I was an obstacle. My marriage, my life, my very existence had simply been an inconvenience to their twisted desires. A wave of nausea washed over me. I clutched the journal tighter, as if its physical presence could somehow anchor me to a reality that was rapidly dissolving. I remembered the storm that had supposedly claimed Clara, the ferocity of the winds, the churning, unforgiving sea. Had she truly been out there, battling the elements? Or had it all been a prearranged rendezvous, a dramatic exit orchestrated to perfection? The thought sent a fresh tremor through me. If she had faked her death, then the storm, the capsized boat, the recovered personal effects, all of it was part of the elaborate charade. My gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, where a framed photograph of Clara and me stood. We were younger then, carefree, our arms slung around each other, grins plastered across our faces. Clara, with her bright, mischievous eyes, and me, a little more reserved, but radiating a shared happiness. Looking at that image now felt like gazing at a stranger. Who was Clara? Really? The sister I'd adored? Or this calculating woman capable of such profound deceit? The journal didn't offer a clear timeline for the faked death, only a growing anticipation for the new beginning Clara so eagerly anticipated. She wrote of the relief she felt when David finally agreed to her plan, the sacrifice it would require. Sacrifice. What sacrifice? Her life. Or mine. I flipped through the pages, desperately searching for a clue, a detail that might explain the sheer audacity of their scheme. There were passages detailing Clara's meticulous research into disappearing, her acquisition of a new identity, her plans to relocate. She spoke of wanting a clean break, of shedding her old life like a skin. But why the charade of death? Why such a cruel deception? Then a passage near the end of the journal stopped me cold. Clara described a final conversation with David, just days before her supposed demise. He was apparently hesitant, racked with guilt over deceiving me. Clara, ever the manipulator, had reasoned with him, painting their future together as the ultimate reward for their present suffering. She'd even mentioned a contingency, a way to ensure I wouldn't suspect anything for a very long time. David, she'd written, don't let Sarah's grief hold you back. It's a necessary evil. She'll mourn me, of course, but she'll heal. And when she does, she'll remember me as the sister she loved, and you as the devoted husband who helped her through it. It's foolproof. And if, by some remote chance, she ever starts to question things, you know what to do. The insurance policy is our safety net. It will ensure her silence and our peace. Insurance policy? Silence? My blood ran cold. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken menace. What insurance policy? What silence? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots, to piece together the chilling implications. Clara hadn't just faked her death. She had, with David's complicity, set up a system to keep me from ever uncovering the truth. A system that, if triggered, would likely involve me. I reread the passage, my fingers trembling. The implication was terrifyingly clear. If I ever got too close to the truth, if my suspicions ever solidified into undeniable proof, they had a way to silence me. Permanently. The accident wasn't just a way to be together. It was a calculated move to control my narrative, my future, and ultimately, my life. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The cheerful ambiance of my home had evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of dread. This was no longer a story of a sister's betrayal. It was a story of a sister and a husband conspiring against me, a conspiracy so elaborate and cruel it bordered on the diabolical. I closed the journal, the sound a soft thud in the deepening twilight. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of emotions, began to settle into a cold, hard clarity. Grief was a luxury I could no longer afford. The Sarah who had mourned Clara and trusted David was gone, replaced by someone who knew the truth, or at least, the terrifying outlines of it. I had to know. I had to understand the full extent of their deception. Was Clara alive? Was she living a new life somewhere, oblivious to the terror she had unleashed upon me? And David? Was he still here, playing the grieving widower, waiting for his moment to ensure my silence? My gaze fell upon the telephone, its sleek black surface reflecting the dimming light. My fingers hovered over the keypad. Who could I call? Detective Miller? He'd been so sympathetic, so earnest, but he'd also been the delivery system for their lies. Could I trust him? Or was he part of it, some unwitting pawn, or worse, a willing accomplice? The silence in the house was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a vast, echoing chasm filled with unspoken horrors. It pressed in on me, a physical weight, making it difficult to breathe, making it impossible to think clearly. But one thought, sharp and unyielding, pierced through the fog of my fear. I would not be silenced. I would not be their victim. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely unsteady, like a newborn fawn. The journal was still clutched in my hand, a tangible piece of evidence, a weapon. I needed to gather more. I needed to find out where Clara was, if she was indeed alive. And I needed to confront David, to see the truth in his eyes, to expose the rot that had festered beneath the surface of our lives. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, fraught with danger. But for the first time since I'd heard the news of Clara's death, a flicker of something akin to resolve ignited within me. Clara had faked her death and stolen my husband. But she hadn't stolen my life. Not yet. And I would fight with every fiber of my being to ensure she never would. The first step was to find out if she was still breathing, and if so, where she was hiding. And then I would deal with David. The thought sent a shiver, not of fear, but of cold, determined purpose, through me. The journal lay open on my lap, its pages a testament to a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound. The sunlight, which had once seemed to bless my living room, now felt harsh, exposing the dust motes dancing in the air like mocking specters. The hushed quiet of the house, once a refuge, now pressed in on me, thick with unspoken horrors. Clara's effervescent spirit, the one I'd always cherished, had been a carefully constructed facade, a shimmering lure concealing a core of cold, calculating deceit. And David. My David, the man I'd shared my life with, my dreams, my very breath, had been complicit. My grief had been a suffocating blanket, heavy and absolute. But now, it was being systematically stripped away, replaced by something far colder, far more potent, a chilling resolve. The numbness had dissipated, leaving behind a raw, visceral clarity. The hollow ache in my chest was no longer the phantom limb of a lost sister, but the gaping maw of betrayal. I reread the passages, my eyes tracing the familiar, elegant script that was so undeniably Clara's. He looks at me, Sarah, and I see the future I've always craved. He whispers my name, and it feels like coming home. Our Sarah. She'll be an obstacle, of course. But these things can be managed. The sea is so vast, so forgiving. The words seared themselves into my mind. Managed. Forgiving. Such clinical terms for what they had planned. The storm, the capsized boat, the recovered effects. It was all a meticulously crafted illusion. Clara, my vibrant, impulsive twin, had orchestrated her own disappearance, and David, my steadfast husband, had been her co-conspirator, her lover. The insurance policy. That was the chilling coda. A safety net for Sarah, should she ever question. A final, generous gesture to ensure her silence. They had even planned my complicity. My grief was to be my gilded cage, my sorrow the price of their newfound happiness. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They had gambled with my life, with my entire reality, and they had expected me to lose. But I hadn't lost. I had found this journal. I had found the truth. My hands, which had trembled with sorrow just weeks ago, were now steady. I closed the journal, the soft thud echoing in the unnerving silence. My gaze swept across the room, the familiar photographs on the mantelpiece suddenly alien. There was David, beaming, his arm around my shoulder. And there was Clara, a mischievous glint in her eyes, her arm around David's waist. A silent promise of shared secrets. The images, once sources of comfort, now felt like taunts. Sarah, the obstacle. Sarah, the one to be managed. Sarah, whose silence was to be purchased. The thought of confronting them, of ripping their carefully constructed world apart, was no longer terrifying. It was exhilarating. A dark, intoxicating thrill coursed through me, a stark contrast to the crushing despair that had held me captive for so long. I was no longer the grieving widow, the shattered sister. I was a hunter, but I couldn't act rashly. They expected a grieving Sarah, a broken Sarah. They wanted me to fade into the background, a casualty of their grand design. I had to play their game, at least for now. I had to be smarter. My mind, sharpened by the venom of their betrayal, began to churn. Clara's death had been staged. Where would she go? They had planned a future, a clandestine life together. David had a life here, a career, a home. He couldn't have simply vanished. Clara, on the other hand, was free. Free to reinvent herself, free to live the life she'd stolen. The journal offered clues, fragmented whispers of their clandestine meetings, the secluded cove where they'd first confessed their feelings, the small, out-of-the-way cafe where they'd exchanged stolen glances. Clara's penchant for the dramatic, her love for disguises and anonymity, would have been a powerful asset. And the insurance policy. It was a significant sum, I knew. Enough to start over, to disappear without a trace. They had clearly thought this through, every contingency. But they hadn't accounted for me. For Sarah, the twin who knew her better than anyone, who could spot a lie in Clara's eyes from across a crowded room, who had loved David with an unwavering devotion that now burned like a brand. I stood, the journal clutched in my hand. The polished mahogany of the coffee table felt cool beneath my fingertips. The antique Persian rug, usually a source of comfort with its intricate patterns and soft fibers, now seemed to absorb the light, deepening the shadows. The silence in the house was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a palpable entity, a witness to their treachery, and now, a confidant to my burgeoning plan. I needed to gather more information. I needed to understand the full extent of their deception, to gather irrefutable proof. Detective Miller, bless his well-meaning but perhaps naive soul, had accepted their story. He had seen the recovered effects, the supposed confirmation of Clara's demise. He wouldn't be looking for a living, breathing twin sister and a husband who'd faked her death. My focus shifted to David. He was the linchpin, the one who had to maintain the facade. He was living a lie every day with me. How did he manage it? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I remembered his comforting embraces, his hushed condolences, the way he'd held me when I wept for Clara. It had all been a performance, a grotesque charade. I needed to observe him, to find cracks in his armor. I needed to see if the man I'd loved was still somewhere beneath the layers of deceit, or if he was entirely consumed by Clara's manipulative allure. A plan began to form, a dangerous, intricate dance that would require every ounce of my intelligence and Clara's own cunning, twisted to my own ends. I would pretend to continue grieving, to remain the broken woman they believed me to be. I would let them believe they had won. But beneath the surface, I would be digging. I would be searching for Clara, for the truth of her survival, and for the undeniable evidence of David's complicity. The journal was the first piece of the puzzle, a vital key. But there had to be more. Financial records, hidden communications, witnesses they hadn't considered. The weight of the journal in my hand felt less like a burden and more like a weapon. The words Clara had written were no longer just a confession. They were a roadmap to their downfall. I walked to the window, looking out at the sun-drenched street. Children's laughter drifted on the breeze, a sound so achingly normal it was almost unbearable. It was a stark reminder of the life they had stolen from me, the innocence they had shattered. But I wouldn't let them get away with it. Clara had faked her death, and David had stolen my husband. Or rather, he had stolen the man I thought was my husband. Now, it was my turn. I would find Clara. I would expose David, and I would reclaim my life, piece by shattered piece. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. The silence of the house no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a secret shared, a promise of retribution. The somber gravity of Clara's supposed death had been an elaborate ruse, and the chasm of unspoken horrors was about to be filled with the thunderous roar of truth. The journal lay open on the polished mahogany of my living room table, its pages a testament to a betrayal so profound it felt as if the very air had turned to poison. Clara's elegant script, a mirror of my own, yet infused with a darkness I'd never recognized, detailed not a tragic accident, but a meticulously crafted plot. Her words, once a source of comfort and shared memories, now seared themselves into my mind like molten lead. "Sarah is so trusting," she'd scrawled, the innocent effervescence of her earlier entries curdling into something chillingly pragmatic. "She'll grieve, of course, but David will be there. And once the dust settles, we'll have all the time in the world. All the time in the world." The phrase echoed in the cavernous silence of the house, a silence that had once been a soft blanket of shared grief, but now felt like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. David. My David. The man who'd held me through my tears, his embrace a supposed sanctuary, his whispered reassurances a balm to my shattered spirit. He who'd wept with me over Clara's lost laughter, her vibrant presence extinguished like a candle in a gale. He who was now revealed as the architect of this charade, her lover, her co-conspirator. The locket. My locket. The one David had given me on our 5th anniversary, etched with our initials, a symbol of our enduring love. Clara had admired it, of course, her eyes, so like mine, sparkling with a familiar covetousness. I'd lent it to her, a casual gesture of sisterly affection. Now, its presence among her recovered belongings, so meticulously placed, felt like a taunt, a cruel signature on their masterpiece of deceit. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a breadcrumb, a deliberate clue left for me, perhaps, or a final, arrogant flourish. And then there was the insurance policy. Clara's words, penned with a casual confidence that made my blood run cold. "Once the divorce is finalized, the insurance policy will ensure Sarah's silence. Financially, of course. She'll be taken care of, and we can finally live our lives without her ever suspecting a thing." Divorce? Silence? The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. They hadn't just planned to steal my husband, they'd planned to steal my life, my future, my very voice. The storm that had supposedly claimed Clara had, in reality, been the catalyst for their new beginning, a convenient curtain falling on their illicit drama. My hands trembled as I traced the words, the ink blurring slightly beneath my fingertips. Grief had been a heavy, all-consuming fog, blurring the edges of reality. But this was sharp, crystalline clarity. The hollow ache in my chest that I'd attributed to loss now felt like a gaping wound, raw and exposed. My vision swam, not with tears, but with a burning, nascent rage. The woman who'd wept by the sea, who'd clung to David like a drowning sailor, was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone forged in the crucible of betrayal. I closed the journal, the soft thud of its cover a punctuation mark at the end of a terrifying chapter. I couldn't rely on the police to unravel this. Detective Miller, bless his earnest, somber demeanor, had been a pawn, delivering the news with genuine sympathy, his own grief for Clara, a friend of a friend perhaps, adding another layer to the performance. He'd seen Clara's belongings, not as evidence of a crime, but as the sad remnants of a life tragically cut short. He wouldn't see the calculated deception, the sinister planning etched onto these pages. No, this was my fight, mine and Clara's, and David's. I stood, the floorboards creaking a protest beneath my feet. The house, once a symbol of our shared life, now felt like a gilded cage, filled with the ghosts of my shattered illusions. Every photograph on the mantelpiece, every shared laugh captured in a frame, felt like a mockery. David's arm around my shoulder, his eyes crinkling with feigned affection. I could see it now, the predatory glint beneath the surface. Clara's playful nudge, her whispered secrets. I could hear the venom in those whispers now, the carefully constructed lies. My mind, which had been a churning sea of sorrow, began to organize itself. The journal was my map, their blueprint for destruction. The insurance policy was the key, the mechanism by which they intended to silence me permanently, not just emotionally, but financially. They'd wanted to ensure I wouldn't question their newfound happiness, their sudden inheritance of my life. They'd wanted me out of the picture, a footnote in their scandalous love story. But I wouldn't be a footnote. I would be the author of their downfall. I needed proof, undeniable proof that Clara was alive. The locket was a strong indicator, a deliberate plant. But it wasn't enough. I needed to see her, to confront her with her own words, to witness her gasp of surprise when her carefully constructed world crumbled around her. And David. Oh, David. His betrayal cut the deepest. He was not just a man who had strayed. He was a man who had actively participated in destroying me. My gaze drifted to the window, to the gray, indifferent sky. The beach where we'd held Clara's memorial service felt 1,000,000 miles away, a scene from someone else's life. The wind had been fierce that day, whipping our hair, carrying away the last vestiges of our shared past. Now, I understood. The storm hadn't been nature's fury. It had been their carefully orchestrated fanfare, the dramatic backdrop for Clara's grand exit. I walked to my desk, my movements measured, deliberate. My fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound address book, a relic from my college days, filled with contacts I rarely used. Among them, a name I hadn't thought of in years. Marcus Thorne. A distant cousin of my mother's, a man who'd built a small, discreet private investigation firm in the city. He'd always been quiet, observant, a man who valued facts above all else. He wouldn't be swayed by David's charm or Clara's manufactured grief. He dealt in truths, however ugly. My hand steadied as I picked up the phone. The dial tone hummed, a low, steady sound that grounded me. I knew what I had to do. I had to find Clara. I had to expose David. And I had to understand the true nature of this insurance policy and how it was designed to silence me. The grief was still there, a dull throb beneath the surface, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. Fuel for a fire that would burn away the lies and reveal the truth, no matter how devastating. Marcus Thorne Investigations. A calm, measured voice answered. Marcus, I began, my voice surprisingly steady. It's Sarah Davies. A pause, then a flicker of recognition. Sarah? Good heavens, it's been ages. Is everything all right? No, Marcus, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. Everything is far from all right. I need your help. I think my twin sister, who is supposed to be dead, is alive, and my husband is involved. The silence on the other end stretched, no longer heavy with unspoken grief, but charged with a new, potent anticipation. The game had changed, and I was no longer a victim. I was a hunter. The journal lay open on the polished mahogany desk, its pages brittle beneath my trembling fingers. The words, Clara's words, swam before my eyes, each sentence a shard of ice piercing the fragile shell of my grief. Sarah is so oblivious. It breaks my heart, but it's necessary. David and I, we deserve this happiness, and she'll be taken care of. The policy will ensure her peace. Peace. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. The comforting warmth of the sun-drenched living room, once a sanctuary of shared memories and whispered confidences with David, now felt suffocating, the silence clinging to the antique Persian rug, seeping into the polished wood, and settling around me like a shroud. My husband, the man who had held me through my supposed widowhood, whose grief had mirrored my own in its outward intensity, was the architect of this elaborate charade, and Clara, my twin, my other half, the vibrant, untamed spirit I had adored, was a monster. The meticulous planning, the clandestine meetings, the chillingly detached descriptions of my impending removal from their lives. It was all there, scrawled in Clara's familiar, looping script. Her supposed death at sea, a tragic accident during a sudden squall, had been a calculated maneuver. The storm, the wrecked boat, the missing body, all meticulously orchestrated. And the insurance policy? It wasn't a condolence payout, it was a gag order, a silencer, a financial leash designed to keep me quiet, to keep me compliant, to ensure my peace by rendering me incapable of disrupting their manufactured happiness. A wave of nausea washed over me. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. The sheer audacity, the depth of their betrayal, was staggering. All those shared tears, the hushed conversations about our shared loss, David's tender embraces. A performance. A sophisticated, cruel act designed to lull me into a false sense of security while they reveled in their stolen life. But grief, I was discovering, was a fickle mistress. It had held me captive for weeks, a suffocating blanket of sorrow. Now it was being systematically dismantled, replaced by a simmering rage, a cold, hard resolve. I would not be a pawn in their twisted game. I would not be silenced. My gaze fell upon the small, leather-bound notebook tucked beneath the journal. It was a more recent acquisition, a stark contrast to Clara's old, familiar diary. This one was sleek, modern, and unadorned. My heart, already a battlefield of conflicting emotions, lurched with a new, prickling unease. What else had Clara been hiding? With renewed determination, I reached for it. The pages were filled with a different hand, a more precise, almost clinical script. It was David's. My breath hitched. This was not a diary, it was a ledger. Dates, amounts, coded entries, arrangements, consultation, disposal fee. It was a chillingly detailed account of their plot, not just the emotional machinations, but the practical, logistical nightmares of staging a death and managing the aftermath. This was more than just infidelity. This was premeditated deception, a meticulously crafted plan to erase me, not just from their lives, but from their future. The disposal fee was undoubtedly connected to the insurance policy, a payment to ensure my silence, my compliance, my eventual disappearance from their narrative. I was an inconvenience, a loose end that needed to be tied up. Metaphorically, or perhaps, given the chilling implications of the ledger, literally. The sun, which had once symbolized warmth and comfort, now felt like a spotlight, exposing the rot beneath the surface of my life. The cheerful chirping of birds outside the window seemed obscene, a mocking counterpoint to the darkness blooming within me. I had been so consumed by the phantom of Clara's death, so blinded by my own sorrow, that I had missed the glaring, undeniable truth that had been staring me in the face all along. David. My David. The man who had sworn to love and protect me, who had cradled my head in his hands and whispered promises of forever. His touch felt alien now, a phantom pressure that sent shivers of revulsion down my spine, his solicitous questions about my well-being, his gentle reassurances, all a performance of the highest order. He had played the grieving husband with Oscar-worthy skill, all while orchestrating my potential downfall. The initial shock had given way to a profound sense of violation, a hollowness that seeped into my very bones. But beneath that hollow ache, a new fire was igniting, a primal instinct for survival. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't be the victim of their greed and their twisted desires. I closed David's ledger, the snap of the cover echoing in the suddenly too quiet room. My gaze drifted to the phone on the desk. I knew who I needed to call. Not the police? Not yet. They would see only the grieving widow, the distraught sister. They wouldn't see the calculated cruelty, the intricate web of deceit. I needed someone who understood the shadows, someone who dealt in the clandestine. My fingers, steady now, dialed the number I had found tucked away in the back of Clara's journal, a cryptic note scribbled on a torn scrap of paper. If things go south, MT will know something's wrong. Discreet, reliable. MT Marcus Thorne. The name had been a whisper in the periphery of my life, a private investigator known for his discretion and his uncanny ability to find the lost and the hidden. Clara, it seemed, had been hedging her bets, even in the midst of her audacious plan. The phone rang, each ring a deliberate beat against the pounding in my chest. Finally, a gruff voice answered, laced with a weary professionalism. Thorne. Mr. Thorne, I began, my voice surprisingly steady, a stark contrast to the tempest raging within me. My name is Sarah Davies. I believe my sister Clara Davies is alive, and I believe my husband, David Davies, is complicit in her faked death. A beat of silence, heavy with unspoken questions. Then the weary professionalism shifted, a subtle sharpening of his tone, a hint of intrigue. That's quite a claim, Mrs. Davies. What makes you believe this?